Okay, well, welcome everyone. This is our first episode of Meet a Cheetah. We just finished another cohort training of the care team. And so the purpose of this is for you all to get to know new members of the Cheetah House care team. Our first inaugural episode will feature Scott Lippitt. And yeah, welcome. So, Scott, in the hot seat.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Welcome. And like let's start to get to know you. So before you ended up at Cheetah House, like give us a sense of like who you were before all this and yeah, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so who I was before, I started meditation young, so who I was before will be like teenage years. Um, and at that time in high school, I was a bit shy, but I found my friend group of musicians, and that felt right. We were a close group, and through those friends, I learned about music and started playing piano and guitar. Um, and that's when I would say I started feeling and finding myself through music and songwriting. So that's maybe like the good side. The more challenging side is that I grew up Christian, and my conception and my felt reality of that was very fear-based. So my earliest memories are being very afraid of hell. Um, you know, whether that meant I was going there or someone else, just the concept of it would worry me. And so around those teenage years when I was finding myself through music, I was also starting to question my faith a little bit. Um, so that sets us up for like right before I started meditating. That's kind of where I was at and who I was at that time. So pretty young, figuring life out and finding myself through music.
So this is the part where you get to give us a fun fact about yourself, but I'm going to introduce one of my own, which is that
Okay.
Scott is actually in his childhood bedroom. Like he's not in the usual place that he lives. He's actually in the place where it all started, where he started meditating, in his parents' house. That happened just a special thing for today.
Yeah, that is a fun fact. I usually live in Utah, but visiting family, and they've had this house our whole life. So I am looking at the spot on the floor where I took my bed pillow and started meditating. So this is, yeah, where it all began. Um, and I guess if we're going along with fun facts, I have been a musician for, I mean, well over a decade now, and I can play piano, guitar, bass. But the fun fact is that I can't read music. Even though I had music lessons, I had this very unique teacher. He only taught me jazz, improv, music theory stuff. I didn't even know what he was saying half the time, but he encouraged improvisation and just having fun. So eternally grateful to that person. And also, I can't read any music at all, despite that being part of my profession. Yeah.
All right, let's get into the part about, what drew you to meditation, or you were seeking something different, or walk us through how that happened and how did you get interested in, yeah.
In meditation. Yeah. Um, so it was around 16. I had a very influential friend, both musically, but also he challenged my belief at the time. Ultimately had a change of faith around 16 and didn't feel that Christianity was the right fit and those beliefs were right. And so it was like I remember the felt experience of that. It was quite like a sensory somatic experience having that change, which felt both freeing and also kind of terrifying because I had lost my worldview. That was like my first worldview collapse. Secretly, if I could talk back to myself, I'd say it's not the first one. There's going to be other worldview collapses, but um, so I was in a space of, what do I do? Like I don't have this. I don't have all the answers anymore. And I also am someone that's a bit shy and can get overwhelmed and anxious. And so I was looking for a system that wouldn't require belief or faith, but also could be dedicated to and could be helpful for well-being and um, security, having some sort of way of dealing with life, I think. And I was pretty averse to like other faith-based religions at that time, so uh, I found a book, I think at the library, the Meditation for Dummies. Took that home and just started reading it and doing some of the meditations. I think it also came with some guided meditations, like a CD. And um, within a, within I think my third or fourth time sitting in meditation, I had a very deep sense of stillness come over me, and that's the first time in my life that I had felt space between thoughts and just felt very grounded, still, calm. It was amazing. Like that changed me forever. I think that I that's when I became a bit evangelical and dedicated because I was just experimenting, but was yeah, very shocked by how much it affected me.
So it sounds like the advertising of like this is not a religion. This is more like come and see for yourself. It will be self-evident. That was kind of the pull.
Absolutely. I fell into that so strongly and um being a bit science minded, I really liked the experimental aspect of this,
Mhm.
which was like, I mean, believe what you want, but sit and try this and see what happens. And that coupled with a really big experience was pretty it set me on a track. I didn't know it at the time, but that it set me on a track for sure.
And so this is, as you know, but I'll just say it for everyone else's sake. This is a really common trajectory, is that the initial uh, experiences with meditation are very positive. So how long did that last? It sounds like you had a very positive experience like pretty early on.
I did. Yeah, and for more context, I was practicing concentration, so just like one pointed attention on the breath. And um I would say about, I mean, it's a gradient. It's not like clear. I didn't have a clear switch. Like now it's troublesome. But around I mean, the first 2 years were like completely unproblematic, like only great, very reliable tool. Could do it formally, could do it throughout the day, always worked. And then I think the following 2, 3 years, it was 70% good, like 30% started having some weird. I I say weird. They're not weird now, but at the time I just kind of was confused by them. But yeah, some of the negative experiences started to happen. Um, and then I practiced for 10 years total. So I think around 5 years lines up with about a 50% change where I was like, half of it was good, half of it was not. Yeah.
And what were those like initial kind of signs that things were maybe not, it wasn't kind of delivering the same benefits as it was at the beginning?
Yeah. Trying to remember now the order of things. I think the first was that I started to have weird breathing things happen where at the beginning I could focus on my breath and it mellowed to like a very smooth in and out. But I started having experiences where the breath would stop for a period and then like be jolted into like breathing again. It was very cyclical. That was confusing. And then I um, started, along with that, having panic happen, but not through like the process of sitting and getting more and more anxious, but actually calming, very calm, very still, and then boom, heart's racing, breathing quickly, feeling like something's really wrong. Um, and there is a correlation with what practices I was doing too. About halfway through my 10-year practice, I started doing more Vipassana noting, um, just noting everything. Like this is very Daniel Ingram or um, Shinzen Young. Those were teachers at the time for me. And that had its own set of experiences that were pretty intense, like feeling like I wasn't myself, looking in the mirror and it just looking like a picture of me. Um, is also in the visual stuff. I don't talk about this one as much, but I started having changes in my vision. It felt like there was like a shimmering or the TV snow that you see when you're on like a channel that isn't getting a signal, or at least like old TVs. And I actually went to an eye doctor to get that checked out early on because I thought I had like touched a really hot pepper to my eye or something. Like I assumed there was some physical reason this was happening and got the full scan of my eyeball and everything. It was fine. Um, and so that was one that was coming up. There's kind of a long laundry list, so I'm not sure if I should like just check all the boxes, but I check a lot of them. Fear, panic, dissociation, visual perception changes, changes in sense of self, panic. Yeah.
And so you started off doing like mindfulness of breath,
Mm-hmm.
and at some point and that was from a book.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point you started getting into Shinzen Young and Daniel Ingram, which are pretty far away from the like mindfulness for dummies.
Yeah.
So how did you get there? Because those guys are like kind of on the on another end of some spectrum of sort of like, you know, hardcore, right?
That's very true. The only answer that makes sense to me is like a frog in boiling water effect of I can't point to any one day or one moment that I made a jump. It was a very smooth blend from like picking up a meditation for dummies book to pouring myself into forums and online discussions around the levels of insight and working towards awakening. It's really bizarre, actually, like that shift can happen without there being an aha moment of, whoa, wait, I just started to feel calm and peaceful, and now I'm like deep in this. So I don't have like a perfect answer, but just that I think a continued interest in meditation probably led to Google searches, which led to finding other teachers' writings and forums, and then maybe a propensity towards dedication and hard work and going all the way probably pushed me to some of the more um, extreme forms of vipassana and like attainments, that sort of.
I mean, it
Yeah.
sounds also like, and if I'm hearing this correctly, that what I heard was that you started meditating like more as a kind of mental health, like wellness, kind of calm, like well-being kind of thing, and very much not about salvation or
Yeah.
any kind of religious idea. And now here we are a couple of years later, and we're talking about awakening.
I
So
know.
something else happened in that process. And it sounds like it was completely undetectable and natural and gradual, but like something's your entire reason for meditating is now changed. And
I know.
this is
Yeah.
a thing that I like. We There's a practice called the mind map process. And that's one of the questions in the mind map process was like, why did you first start meditating? And then did somebody else's idea about why you should get meditating like somehow slip in there, and like how did that happen? So it
Yeah.
sounds like it did, and you can't even remember like where when things changed.
No, it was that gradual over a decade. Yeah. It is fascinating, isn't it? Not only having such a change in why I began, but also to start having effects that were not ones I was seeking. And at that point, being so sure of someone else's worldview that I just told myself it was part of the path. That's
Right.
really bizarre. It's like not only did I kind of get sucked in, but I was defending my right to be in immense suffering and have massive changes to my sense of self, and then say that, yeah, but it's all going to be worth it. So, yeah, that's like a pretty big level of devotion, definitely.
So you started having panic, anxiety, dissociation, changes in your visual field that required like a trip to the doctor.
Mhm.
Um, what were the other ones?
Like the breathing
Oh yeah, the
changes.
breathing,
I didn't mention
respiratory
them.
quiescence. Yes.
There we go. I didn't know there's, yeah.
Yep.
Um, and then some involuntary movements, but they were pretty small, like t muscle twitches in my back. Um,
So these all kind
yeah.
of started appearing around year five, but you didn't like stop meditating until 5 years later. So what was going on? Like, and you were, this is not why you started meditating. These were not the things that you were seeking. So what was the process of like getting to the point where you're like, this is not okay? Because at some point it was okay, or it was even like you were convinced that this was a sign of progress, or like what happened? How was your interpretation of what was happening? How did that happen?
Yeah. I'll start with the short answer and then give more detail. The short answer is that those experiences started to follow me off the cushion and affect my functioning, relationships, work, school. That's the short answer. I think the long answer is that, um, it's kind of my project. It was my secret thing. I didn't have a community, although in college I found a small community of people I would go and sit with, but um, mostly it was, you know, reading and practicing alone in a very dedicated way. Um, and any negative effects would mainly stick to the cushion. So I could get up and I could still go about my day and kind of hold this belief that, well, it'll be worth it. Like I'm in this hard stage and it's not benefiting me right now, but there'll be a big payoff. And I could keep it a secret. At a certain point, I could not keep it a secret because I was feeling really off all the time. I was having panic attacks. Socializing was really hard because I felt very detached from myself, and at times thoughts were not coming up in the way that they do that facilitate conversation. Um, and a lot of, depression, something I've been diagnosed with outside of my whole journey of meditation, but there's like a chemistry there for me that was really bad. Like I think what really drove me to seek help was starting to have thoughts about ending my life. And thankfully that triggered a logical piece for me, which was like, I'm for sure not gonna reach awakening if I'm dead. So if this is practices leading me towards that, then like it's time for some sort of intervention or help. Um, and so that was a bit of a wake up call. And that also, this all lined up with 2020, which, for I know I'm not alone in this, a lot of people dedicated even more time to practice because we were at home. So there was a lot going on that pushed my experiences to follow me off the cushion, affect my functioning, affect my relationships, and then um, yeah, it became a bit of a crisis. Yeah.
And so what did reaching out for help look like? What was probably the first of many
Yeah.
attempts to get the right kind of help?
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. I mean, I have to honor my mother actually in this because I was hesitant to bring anyone in to this experience. It was like for a while it was my cool secret. It was the cool way I was like you know, upon reflection, like better than other people. Like I was on this path towards, getting rid of the ego and being better. And so when that started to turn, it felt like a big embarrassment. Like I had a very hard time telling anyone that I was like, hey, I got myself in trouble, like really deep. So I think naturally my mother being, and moms know, mom sometimes can just know something's off, you know? So we started having conversations about it, and she actually found Cheetah House on her own, I think just through Googling, like, yeah, meditation gone wrong or something like that. And then relayed information to me that there were experts and there's research and I'm not alone, which then led me to book a session at Cheetah House to, yeah, get help.
Yeah. So let's walk through that process. Um, what were the turning points for you? Like I mean, I think one of the things we see is that people tried a whole bunch of different things and like nothing helps. Like that's a
Mhm.
very common, like they see a million different teachers and doctors, and it just seems like there's a lot of attempts, and then um eventually something gets traction, and sometimes other things that they tried before like now work. But like where
Mm.
was, what was your trajectory like? Where were the turning points for you?
Yeah. So maybe something to note before this is that I sought help from so many meditation teachers, yoga teachers, everyone prior to coming to Cheetah House, and they all told me to continue practicing and that it is just a hard stage. And the worst thing I could do would be to stop. So yeah, just noting that. But then coming to Cheetah House, the first thing that was really helpful was just to know that I was not alone in that it wasn't a failure on my end. It wasn't a it's not that I could have tried harder or tried differently. It's just straight up research that about half of people experience some adverse effect and 10-ish% it affects their functioning to the point of having issues at work. And that's where I was. So that alone was like, okay, this doesn't have to be my like secret that I really got myself into trouble. Um, and then, being introduced to a neuroscientific or more Western biological view of what could be going on, like having a new framework was really helpful because my previous one was that I was in the dark night of the soul and it was a spiritual hell basically. But then to be given a new framework where these experiences are actually quite common responses and are very human, like dissociation, anxiety, panic, um, or hypoarousal, feeling really numb. It's just that we don't want to spend all our time there. It's not that, but they're nothing to really be scared of, or they're not abnormal. It's just, do we want to be spending all our time in those states? That was a whole new framework that gave me a whole new trajectory of finding, balance and homeostasis in my body versus like a dedication to practice would be what would save me. Um, so recapping, like not alone. There's research um, being presented with new frameworks for understanding what was going on. That was a turning point. Um, Getting a depression diagnosis and medication was part of that. And then the last thing I'll say is scaffolding, which continues to be a big part of my journey and also is um, a big way I work with people at Cheetah House now as a care team member. Um, but that practice was the only like thing that seemed to address the specifics of um, particularly feeling that I had lost myself and there's just no point, like no it's like, yeah, disconnection. like I did get help with depression through medication and that traditional journey, and I got help not feeling alone through the community, but I was still left with this like sense that everything was just passing and I was just the observer to everything. But scaffolding helped me, um I don't know if reverse is the right word, but use some of the attention skills I've learned, but be building connection and enriching my connection and story versus trying to get away from it and distance. It was like getting back, getting closer. That was a huge turning point. I know you, yeah. I think I listed like five or
Probably
six turning
unpack.
points.
We should probably unpack what is scaffolding
Yeah,
and like what was it for you specifically?
got it. Yeah. So, um, scaffolding is a practice that has some roots in somatic experiencing and also research by Joel Kruger on the scaffold itself. But was developed through Cheetah House specifically to help with the emptiness, meaninglessness, or I mean, it's broader than that too, but uh, it's like a meditation adjacent practice for getting connected to yourself and getting the associative brain to work again. Um, for example, when I was at my worst, I could look at a picture of my family or my old sneakers on the ground, and there was no difference in my body or mind or emotion that would tell me that, my family is like history, importance, love, and these shoes are just, there's something, but I mainly, they're not that important. There was just nothing. So for me, it was a way to be connected and make positive associations to the world. And then it can wrap around and help, um, what's the word? Help regulate your nervous system.
Mhm.
Um, did you want to share? I mean, I have trouble explaining scaffolding in like a succinct way. I tend to ramble.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people that come to Cheetah House, have years of experience with meditation. It's often their kind of like main thing that they do. Like it's part of their like pretty central to their identity. And it's the main way that they uh resource and manage their nervous system and their arousal and their moods and their emotions. And so when meditation falls through, there can be this kind of crisis of how do I manage myself? Like my main sort of way that I, orient to the world and help manage my own emotions is no longer available to me. And so that's a crisis. And then it's like, well, who am I? I just lost my entire identity. Like I was a meditator, I was a Buddhist, I was part of this community. And when you lose the ability to meditate, you kind of lose your membership card. And so there's like not being able to meditate and having adverse effects can be like a multi-layered crisis, existential crisis. And so scaffolding, is a sort of trauma sensitive way to give somebody back a practice that gives them the maximum likelihood of not having it be bad for them because they're choosing it. And also all the power dynamics around like, you know, I didn't sign up for enlightenment, but somehow like that's what I'm doing. Like you bypass that because you're getting to choose like where you want to go. Like you as the meditator or the client is sort of driving the bus. Um, and then it's also done in dyads. So it's done with two people, one of which is the scaffolder. And we used to call them resourcerers when we called them we called it resourcing. But and the idea there is that you can kind of borrow the other person's nervous system for a while. When you're like super dysregulated, when you're like really just like kind of a mess and like can't, everything is just throwing you off, to be able to use your mammalian like resonance system that like, when you're around I don't know. It's like why people like cat videos. It's like you see a funny cat and you think you start to like get amused, right? That's we have this magical thing like in our mammalian system that we can link up with. And so that's part of it. And then the other thing is like we automatically use um the physical world to like to help us feel better. Like, there's power suits, we listen to music, we buy flowers like and put them in, in our rooms. Like we do this all the time to like, but it's not part of any like known therapeutic modality. And so it's like, well, why not use that? Like it's something that we're already doing. So that's kind of like, a multi-layered justification as to why we use scaffolding. And I think, and the last piece I think is like, when you've had this kind of rupture in your identity, um, it can help you go back and find things that like, kind of who were you before, like what was important to you as a child, and kind of link back up to a self that maybe got arrested from or put on pause from their meditation practice or hijacked. And that you can it's a lot of people like try to go back to some form of meditation, and it's just like so contaminated by all the trauma that we want to try to give them something that's kind of uncontaminated and sort of from some other place in their life. So anyway, that's my download about scaffolding. So yeah, so tell me what it was like for you. Um, like paint a picture for us what it was like.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was really stupid when I heard about it. Because I mean, I was so lost, and I had only been used to really hardcore dedicated practices. And then those who are familiar with scaffolding, um, when you're having it facilitated, you're asked to connect to something in your space that might be safe or um, yeah, safe, meaningful, true, comfortable, or it's sometimes even just neutral, like anything you feel any resonance towards. Um, and I really didn't believe that doing that was going to help. Then my first object was a pen, and I think for it was kind of like pulling teeth to get me to speak on why that pen was important to me. But then somewhere along the way, as I was describing where I got the pen, how I use it to write letters to people I care about, and then um, thinking about the process of sending letters to someone and how it's kind of like a lost art, and how it's really meaningful to receive a letter, you know. And then I was feeling, oh, connection, and then connecting with these people in my life that I've written, and all of that was in this pen. Some part of me knew that when I was asked, what in my space am I connected to? And so even though the practice was quite simple on paper, I was very moved to know, oh, this part of me is still here. It just needs a little coaxing to come out. And that's very emotional to know that that self is not actually lost, that like that's a real fear when you're feeling so out of it, so dissociated that it's over. Like I am gone. This practice destroyed me, that was like what I believed. But then to be guided through such a simple practice of what is something you can connect to in your space, and then even though it was just a small like thing I tapped into, it was proof to me that the self was still intact, but I was just out of touch with it. Um, and so over time, what that looked like was, having that process facilitated for a bit through care team members and through Willoughby, and it's very helpful to have someone there with you. They can kind of guide it. And then I started to practice on my own as well. And it worked in two ways for me. One is that every time I would relate to an object, that object was sort of a new friend where I like knew, okay, this pen helps me relate to connection and meaning and people in my life. And so that specific relationship to the pen was sort of rekindled. But behind the scenes, what's happening is that I'm priming my brain and body to make associations that are positive again. And um, whereas with meditation, I would cut those thoughts, they would just pass, they wouldn't generate the next thing. I was training the brain to make these links as I look around my space and be like, oh, yeah, that reminds me of this day I was with a friend, and this friend reminds me of how we used to like joke around and get into trouble, and that has a certain energy. And um, so, anyways, to summarize that last thing I'm saying, it um, helped me connect to specific objects, and they would be kind of like a rekindled friend in my life. But behind the scenes, I was priming myself to have life automatically be making meaning throughout the day. Um, in the same way that meditation caught fire and I like ended up feeling super distant, scaffolding caught fire for me and became an automatic process as well. And so um, I got to the point where I didn't have to formally do it every day, but that, life was just kind of automatically coming to me in a more meaningful way. Yeah.
I just want to, for people who are like just getting used to this idea of scaffolding, if you go onto the online courses tab on the Cheetah House website, um, the last video as part of the dissociation class is a standalone video on scaffolding, and I go through like the theoretical basis of it, and then like literally what we are doing as facilitators, and then I do a live session with Peter. And so you can see like what it would look like if you want to be scaffolded, you can just ask one of the care team members to scaffold you, but you can get a sense of what it is from that video. And we also often have scaffolding workshops. Sometimes we've been having them once a month where you can come and you can be scaffolded, or you can just watch and be an observer. So those are other ways to connect with the process. I don't think I remember scaffolding you that first time with a pen, and I remember being like super impressed about how much it changed you in that 1 hour. And it is totally news to me that you were like, this is lame.
Yeah, sorry.
But this is like, and I mean, to some extent, I see that as kind of a shift in identity where like the
Yeah.
person, the self that was saying this is stupid is the I'm an enlightened meditator, hardcore meditator, and this is like this is some dumb like I don't know parlor trick kind of thing, and that just doing it somehow like overcame that arrogance or something. I don't know. It's interesting. I'm very familiar with the resistant client syndrome. I am one of the people. I have lots of judgments about things that are happening. So it's funny. You don't strike me as somebody that would be like that. So it's hilarious to hear you like confess finally that.
Confess. Yeah, there's like yeah, parts of myself for sure that um I mean, it just went against everything I thought. I was supposed to be able to regulate my nervous system by closing my eyes and doing it all internally. And any sort of regulation through the outside world was like giving up. It wasn't the practice. Um, so yeah, it was kind of against some things, but that I was, trained in, but it also opened my eyes to see that uh everyone in my life is doing that all day. If I pick any one of my family members or friends, I see how built into their life they have connections to um, music, art, food, coffee in the morning, routines, um, pets, uh, yeah, all of that, and it's so integrated into their life. So, anyways, all that to say, I don't, I didn't land there. I now think it is very profound and like profound in that it's not trying to be profound, but just trying to get us to tap into what's already present that we haven't felt in a while. And I appreciate you guiding me there. Yeah.
Well, and also just to say that this, quite hesitant start that we're hearing about, that Scott is now like the star scaffolder on the care team, and he's so good at scaffolding that he is the one who teaches scaffolding to our care team. So just want to say a little turnaround there. So if you're kind of a little suspect of the it could take off for you too. So it took off for you. And this is kind of what happens is that you get this little like tiny little wedge in your wall of lack of progress, and then there's a slow trickle, and then there's a current. So what did that look like to you? You ended up doing something kind of unusual. Or I should say, everybody finds their own sort of flavor of recovery. What was your flavor?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of transitions that were going on in that part of my life as well. Like I was in a at the time of in crisis was working as an environmental scientist in an office environment. I left that job amidst the crisis because I wasn't functioning. And as I started to scaffold and reconnect to things, I eventually started to really reconnect to music, circling back to the start of our conversation, which was even before all of this, music was a place I really started to feel and find myself. So to circle back to that, not only as just um, a hobby or an interest, but as like a core part of my life, was huge. So I actually started just working at a restaurant to meet the bills, but was um, dove into recording an album, playing a lot of shows locally. Um, I've had actually a couple albums come out since then that were uh, like I took the energy I put into meditation into creating art, and it was awesome because it turns out you can actually see progress when you invest into a project that uh, can be fulfilled, I guess. I don't know. So that was really gratifying to return to something that felt like me, um, reconnect to myself and other musicians and artists, and also feel that um, effort was actually leading to something physical I could hold and like also was, paying bills through playing music out, meditation wouldn't pay bills even though I was dedicating hours and hours to it. So there's a lot of layers as I think during this conversation I'm realizing there's a lot of layers and it can be easy to talk about all of them. But uh for the sake of being clear, music was a huge part of my recovery and
Mhm.
art in general. I now see art as like the epitome of association making,
Mhm.
whereas meditation was a bit distance. Art is like connection, love, proliferation, creation, and that journey feels more true to who I am right now.
So the music was already there, was
Mhm.
already a piece of you before the meditation that you reconnected with. It was a place where you could basically reallocate all the attention and effort that you put into meditation,
Yeah,
and put it into something that was actually going to give you back something else.
yeah,
There was more to it. There was also um, this shattering of meaning, working through that trauma. I mean, it seemed to have a
yeah,
trauma recovery process built into it. And for a lot of people, that's writing in your journal. And but for you, it was writing songs and music, and that you weren't just making music, you made an entire album called Meaning Maker.
yeah, yeah.
That was many of the songs were actually about your meditation experiences.
That's
Can you
right.
talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Meaning Maker is, I think I should actually check. I think well, it's out there. I mean, you can find it on, you know, all the places people listen to music. But it is a song, an album with songs about the a bit about the healing process, but some of them are just straight up about how dark it feels when you are not feeling yourself. That sense of meaninglessness, the void, the blackness. But then from that space, like creating a spark and following it and leaning into the 1% of you that does feel good. I think that's the meaning maker part of that album, and like it's paying homage to the darkness and not trying to make light of it, because as people on this call know or listening to this, like it can be almost psychedelic how gray and empty life can feel in those moments. So I don't want it to just be like a um oh, everything's just great, but to like really like see people in their darkness, I think was one of the goals of that album, and be like, yeah, it's for real. And from within that space, it is possible to kindle like the smallest little flame and spark, um, and make meaning from a space of emptiness. Uh, and yeah, over time, it starts to feel actually quite solid, like you do have ground to stand on, and your personhood is back. Um,
I just want to
Matt,
share
is there
with
any more
everyone.
questions?
I just want to share with everyone. I just put it in the chat. On the Cheetah House webpage, that we have a tab called Community, and so far, that's a place where we can all kind of share stuff that we're doing. But so far, it's only Scott. But his video Meaning Maker, the title track of the Meaning Maker album, is there's a video of that, and there's the lyrics below if you want to like see the lyrics, which are um yeah, I see a little bit of defensive response there. Defensive response is a term that we use. It's borrowed from somatic experiencing trauma, and it's a way of kind of I don't know, asserting yourself against what harmed you. Basically, it's a way of defending yourself against what harmed you, and the lyrics are a little bit like a little fuck off kind of
Yeah, I
tiny bit, like just a little. So it's very gratifying to hear, for those of you who are having that feeling of like wanting a little bit of like just wanting, yeah, just check it out.
it's in there. Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that aspect. It's definitely a real one. And yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just have to say this is really badass.
Oh, thanks.
Um, so yeah, so let's turn the page a little bit about yeah, where are you now? And I know that like before you made that album, actually, you did the care team training. So
Hmm.
you were actually part of cohort one, the first cohort of the care team. And instead of actually going into being a peer supporter, that's when you like actually spent a year making the album. So
That's
now we're
right.
in cohort two, and you are actively part of the care team. So walk us through like how you first decided to become part of the care team and what that experience has been like.
Yeah, I think I found community at Cheetah House and um stuck around, which I think everyone's journey is a bit different. Some people get what they need and kind of like go on with their life, but I felt drawn to stick around, and then I think was very interested in the behind the scenes of like why does scaffolding work? What is, the what's going on, and then was invited to learn through the cohort process of being trained a bit um on adverse effects of meditation and on the types of things that we've seen have been helping, and reached a point where in my own journey, giving and receiving other people who are have experiencing the same things felt right. And I think that's important because I mean there was a period where it was still a little rocky and I wasn't quite ready to also receive other people. But I was invited, and I started leading some support groups, and then started seeing people one-on-one. And you know, I think the big thing for me is understanding what peer support is and what it's not. Peer support is not therapy, so I'm not coming in with the answers, or I'm not going to diagnose or tell you what your experience is, but instead it's just showing up as a friend. And um, that is such a safe space, because I think in a lot of spiritual circles there is um, a lot of telling people what their experience is from people higher up and what they should do. And I was very averse to that. And so that's like what I really love about Cheetah House. Like, we are geared towards the adverse effects, or meditation and adverse effects meditation, but ultimately the core values I really resonate with are person-centered care and meeting as a friend, and just hearing people's stories and not telling them what they need to do. And yes, like sharing pieces of my story if it's relevant, and they people want to know, um, but working together to find what that person needs for themselves. That's like a core part of Cheetah House that I really resonate with, and has um, kept me being really excited about being a part of the team and meeting people one-on-one. Yeah.
And so there are quite a few care team members, and we're all really different, and we all have things that we're good at or that we kind of specialize in. So how would, you know, what would be like your sort of unique identifying feature? Like, why would somebody come to see you as opposed to Mandy or me, or like, I mean, I'll already say that I always send people to Scott to get scaffolded. So that's like that's a known thing. But like, from your perspective, what kind of people do you love to see? That, like, who do you hope kind of signs up for you?
Absolutely, yeah. And just disclaimer, I know that more care team members are going to go through this process I'm in, so I could easily talk for a long time about why I love Mandy and what Mandy's good at, and why, any of the other care team members. I'm choosing not to do that for the sake of time, and knowing that other people are going to share that for themselves, but just know that I really appreciate the care team, and we all have our own unique strengths. Um, for me, I think um, scaffolding something I love exploring with people. And even more broadly, just being a friend on people's journeys, getting to know someone. And um, I think that's a real strength of mine, is the analogy I kind of view it as like meeting someone in this dark woods, where they just potentially lost their community, or lost their faith, or trying to work through worldview. um that's a space I love to meet people. So if you're in that space of like, I don't know what to believe anymore, and life basically seems pointless, I love that, meeting people there. And then, yeah, the scaffolding piece of like, well, let's walk through this woods together and go in directions slowly and carefully, but that feel right to you. And I can help be like a solid mirror and reflect back what's working. I can introduce some new ideas to see if things are sticking, but I ultimately don't know what's best, but I'm like stoked to be there on the journey. um so more explicitly, I think, love working with scaffolding, love working with worldview. um if you're dealing with meaninglessness, or you feel like you've lost yourself, that's I think those are my strengths. Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned the worldview way back when you were saying that you thought you were in the dark night of the soul, which was, we could unpack that for like an entire hour, because it's like, weren't you doing Buddhist practice? Isn't that a Christian thing? Like, how did that get all mixed up with itself? And um, anyway, so it sounds like that's a whole rabbit hole that a lot of people go down, where there is a whole sort of online set of notions that bad shit is supposed to happen in your meditation practice, and it's actually a sign of progress. And like, you can be in that that's in various iterations of that notion for years and years and years. And it sounds like you kind of did that, Scott, and like you kind of know what those iterations look like and how they feel, and you somehow, wised up out of it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite places to meet people. There was someone, and obviously like no identifying anything, but someone that was a couple weeks into this idea that they were in the dark night of the soul, but were already having really intense reactions to the practice. And um, it was great just to meet with them and talk and kind of check in with like, well, how long would you want to feel this way before the reward is worth it? Um, that was the question that woke me up a bit to it. And then sharing like, just as a data point, not that this would happen to you, but I tried this for 5 years and was like shattered. And didn't make it to recovery, but man, if I could go back and just check in with myself and be like, hey, do you remember why you started meditating? And like, is this leading you there? Yeah, that would have been great.
So, as you know, we have a series called Letters to My Former Self, which is basically another way to kind of get to know care team members or others outside of Cheetah House, that they kind of are talking to their previous selves, like, oh man, if I had known X, Y, and Z, like, so the things that we wish we had known. And so before we turn it over to the audience for questions, like, are there little nuggets like that where you're like, here's what I wish I'd known, like, and I'm just gonna save you the time right now, like anything like that, like that you want make sure people know who are kind of
Yeah,
in this process right now.
yeah. I think the big one is that, um, well, yeah, I see how this is an emotional setup, like responding to your younger self. I would tell myself that no one really knows what's going on. Even the people that claim they do argue immensely. And you don't actually need to know the truth or reality to be loved. I think that's what I would say. Like, you can live a full life not knowing what the heck's going on, and you're whole and like deserving of love. Maybe kind of cuts to the root of it. um, and then that there are a lot of ways to be a resilient person. Um, it can be enticing to have this one skill that is the only weapon or the only tool you need to deal with life. But the risk of that is if that tool breaks, where are you going to be? So maybe encouraging myself towards having like a diversified profile of like ways to feel safe and regulated, and um yeah, maybe just those two things, two nuggets right there.
Great. Okay, well, let's open it up to the rest of the folks who've been patiently listening and probably writing down questions.
I mean, I'm honored that you're like, I'm honored that you're asking me. And I hear so much bravery in your um willingness to be vulnerable and honest with a following that you've cultivated amidst like the heat you're getting from other YouTubers and non-dual teachers. So just want to honor your bravery and vulnerability. Just to share that I'm here as a friend, and Cheetah House as a community is like, you're not alone in standing up to for what you believe in. And sometimes it's people leaving a community, but it sounds like you've gathered a community and you're being honest with them, and it's leading to some change up. So as we've talked about layers, that is a whole other layer, like the um, layer of community, and being a public person probably needs its like is deserving of its own care and help. So yeah, just to share you're welcome here. And um, the only you're asking for advice, yeah, I think speaking from your own experience and speaking with nuance, that way it allows other people to have a different opinion without feeling that they're attacked, and then they're going to come back with more heat. It's just like they want to be mad at you, but they're like, oh, talking about his own experience, so now I can't rip his ideology to shreds.
You know, people need to understand that adverse effects of meditation is just one piece of the syndrome. The other piece is that speaking up about it will produce hostility from everyone else. And so that's another like layer of the whole syndrome, is that you're already struggling with, you know, symptoms from meditation. Now everyone hates you and are attacking you. And so, you know, there might be a time and place that's more appropriate to, you know, do the confrontation of, you know, the sort of the problem. So I don't know. We kind of take a trauma, like a phased approach to, like a trauma-based phased approach, which is that like, let's get you safe. Let's get you resourced first before you like take on the world. And like, if you decide to put yourself in that position, let's make sure you have allies, and let's make sure that, you know, like we'll review your handouts and your message to make sure that it is the least provocative of attacks. You know what I mean? Like, let's do it in a way that's going to minimize the harm to you. So that's kind of what I would say.
If I'm hearing right, your question is, you know, does preference and engaging with preference did it help me on my journey towards feeling more like myself? And yeah, it definitely did. And I have stories I could tell about periods I had to make a decision based on preference when I didn't have access to that. And it was so confusing and disorienting because I could tell I was in a place where I was supposed to know what I wanted and I didn't, but I had to make a decision right away. So I will say, yeah, preference was also something that started as a small flame and then was kindled and grew to now it feels natural. But at the beginning, I had to really sit and give considerable effort into deciding between between objects, what I cared about and what was just sort of something that was a tool versus like, oh, this pen has a history and I care about it. um Deciding between two colors gets talked about at Cheetah House, like which of these two colors do I like more. That took like formal effort for a period, but similarly to scaffolding, it just eventually kind of becomes natural again. And then as it pertains to music, yes, I think my songwriting is based off of experimenting with chords and notes and then following the ones that are evoking something. So there's like little preference decisions being made as I go.
Maybe we should leave it there. Thanks, Scott, for an awesome first session. And for everyone else, we will continue to have these. We don't know who's up next, but I think Mandy's probably going to be soon. And yeah, come back. And thanks for coming. All right. Goodbye, everyone.